Where are the 3 missing Seraphim? We currently have a snake, a bear, a hawk, and a shark. However, our cyborg clone Zoo is notably missing a crocodile, a bat, and a flamingo. To answer where, we first need to tackle why. Why were the Warlords chosen as the Seraphim? Why not the Admirals? Why not the Rocks Pirates? Why not any number of other strong fight people? And I think we might be looking at this the wrong way. It's less why we chose the Warlords, and more why did we make these people Warlords to begin with? Ever since discovering Mads around 2 decades ago, the world government has been well aware of cloning. In fact, they even hired one of the clones to work for them and would ultimately give another the title of Warlord. It was around this point that the world government also hired Vegapunk himself, with a proposition that probably went as follows. Hey, Mr. Dr. Man, build us an army of clones or we will kill murder you. Okie dokie, Mr. Government people. Just one problem. We're gonna need some pirate DNA to do that. So in between naps, the 5 Elder Stars thought long and hard about how to achieve this, and eventually they arrived at what could be, in retrospect, a very insidious plan. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna open a program called the 7 Warlords of the Sea. We'll accept applications from pirates, offering them amnesty for their various crimes, and you know what? We're even going to allow them to commit new crimes. Seems like a good deal, yes. However, this is but a clever ruse. Upon acceptance into the program, we'll invite them for a meeting, during which we'll covertly obtain a sample of their DNA to create our ultimate clone force. The 7 Warlords is a system that has always made precarious sense at best. They're supposed to be one of the 3 great powers, but they've never really lived up to that designation. In reality, they're 7 pirates who were given God mode by the world government and mostly left to their own devices. In fact, they've caused a lot more damage to global stability than they've preserved. But this was an acceptable cost. Let them do whatever they want for a decade or so. It doesn't really matter how obedient they are to us, so long as we can maintain control up until it's time to replace them. In a way, you could consider the 7 Warlords as an alpha test for the eventual Seraphim, gathering these 7 powersome figures under one umbrella and testing their capabilities so as to better understand their future creations. It's quite ingenious, really, because even though practically none of the Warlords obeyed the world government, their name alone was enough to maintain a sort of sense of balance. Temporary balance, but that's all the world government needed. So while it appeared that the Warlords were using the world government, it may very well have been the other way around. The world government was using them all along to create a centralized force of some of the strongest fighters and craziest fruit powers. It does make the world government look incompetent, to the point where it makes people like Fujitora furious, because why are you allowing people like Doflamingo to do all of the bad stuff? And it also confuses various Marine Fleet admirals. But all of this was according to plan. And this is very much why I lean towards the Seraphim consisting of the original 7 Warlords, rather than the newer ones that went on to be spot fillers. Because a project like this didn't just happen in the last year or two. This Seraphim business would have had to have been set in motion long ago. However, there are some factors that may contradict that. One is the very existence of S-Shark. When he was introduced, it was clear that S-Shark was still in his testing phase. However, I would argue that it's possible that the clones are only just now reaching a point of maturity. Right now, there's a lot of confusion about how the Seraphim grow, because it has been referenced that they've been subject to accelerated growth, but I think that just makes their bodies bigger, not necessarily more mature. For example, S-Shark is a child Jinbei, however that child is as big as adult Jinbei. But S-Shark could still have taken 5 to 7 or however many years it is to cultivate. The other interesting thing to note is Devil Fruit powers. S-Shark has Senor Pink's fruit ability, something that could only have been obtained after he was arrested on Dressrosa, with the same issue applying to S-Hawk. His fruit could only have been applied after Darsbones was beaten on Alabasta. In a way, the Straw Hats are pretty directly responsible for a lot of the Seraphim devastating power. But to this, I would counter with the concept of green blood. The fruit ability isn't hard-coded into any particular Seraph, it's actually embedded into the green blood, which is then inserted into a Seraph. And what I'm suggesting is that it may be possible to transfuse different fruit powers into different Seraphim. You take out the existing blood with those fruit alterations, and then you transfuse new blood with new fruit factors. So when abilities like the Super and the Sui become available, it could be a simple process of choosing to equip the Seraphim with those and replace their existing abilities. Sort of like upgrading your gear in some sort of game. And if so, that makes them infinitely more dangerous, because they could be loaded out with the perfect fruit power for any specific mission. But fun fact, the original 7 Warlords were not supposed to be the final composition. And I don't mean that from a meta perspective either. I mean that the world government has had other candidates in mind, the most notable of which being Podcast Ace. Ace was offered a Warlord position. So in a different world, what we could be seeing right now is an Ace Seraph fighting against Luffy. But this also gives us a potentially solid timeline. It's unknown exactly when the 7 Warlords began. However, if Ace was on the original list of candidates, then we can actually narrow that down. Ace was offered the position when he was 17 years old, so roughly 5 years ago, which is very interesting because all of the Seraphim look like they could be around 4 to 5 years old. But as fun as that thought is, we do know that the Warlord system has existed long before then. When Law demanded that Doflamingo stepped down as a warlord, he did imply that he's held the title for at least 10 years. When we see Jinbei's flashback, it's clear that he became a warlord 11 years ago, Gecko Moria reportedly achieved his status 12 years ago, and when Gloriosa explains Boa Hancock's backstory to Luffy, it's implied that she became a warlord 13 years ago. However, predating all of them is the true dinosaur that is Crocodile, who Oda stated in the SBS of Volume 78 became a warlord in his mid-20s, which would be roughly 20 years ago. So no, Ace was not in the original round of offerings, not even close. But it does make me wonder what happened to the warlord whose place he would have assumedly taken. Who was it? Also, this is completely not canon, but Simon from One Piece Great Hidden Treasure of the Nanatsu Islands was also, allegedly, considered to be a warlord candidate at one point. So in a variant, I mean very alternate universe, what we could be seeing right now is Luffy fighting against both Ace and Simon. I tell ya, we're missing out. But the important thing is that the earliest known record of a warlord exists after the world government discovered the Mads cloning. And throughout the years, they could have been like a Eustace kid in a candy store, picking and mixing all sorts of powerful pirates to one day create their own unstoppable force. Regardless, one big question we have right now is why have we only seen these 4 Seraphim? Where are the others? In fact, are there even others? Cloning Jinbei and Kuma makes logical sense because they're the most naturally obedient of the warlords, and also the least emotionally volatile and the most responsible. Mihawk makes a lot of sense from the perspective of raw power. He is undeniably the single strongest warlord, and it's probably not worth doing this project unless we can harness that power. Boa Hancock, on the other hand, is a bit trickier to justify, and the only thing I can come up with is that she looks a lot better compared to the other options. Of the 3 remaining OG warlords, none of them were particularly obedient. One tried to commandeer a country, one actually succeeded in commandeering a country, and the other is more of a general cockwaffle. Doflamingo in particular would probably be the least desirable Seraphim, and actually he's the only warlord who wasn't invited into the program. He blackmailed the world government to get in, which sounds like a very volatile experiment to me, and having conducted similar research with the Rocks pirates, Doflamingo's persona may have been deemed undesirable. Also, he's a world noble, not by title but by blood, and blood is pretty important to the other nobles. So it may have been seen as abhorrent or very, very taboo to clone a celestial dragon. Crocodile is also logically on the lower tier of desirability. Thinking about it, Crocodile's major skill is, well, it's thinking. Intelligence that would be completely wasted on a mindless clone. Plus, his Logia Devil Fruit is currently incompatible with the abilities of Vegapunk to bring into reality. So what would you actually have with a theoretical S Crocodile? You pretty much just end up with a standard out-of-the-box Lunarian, because you can't replicate either of Crocodile's special skills. Meanwhile, Moria is just undesirable in general. He was beaten by Jinbei in a single punch at the Paramount War, so I can certainly see why S Shark was prioritized over a potential S Bat project. Add Moria's above average disobedience on top of that, and he is certainly lower on the list. Also, here's a wacky coincidence. The only 3 Seraphim we haven't seen also happen to be the warlords who were all beaten by Luffy. Now, I'm not saying that the world government is salty or anything, refusing to greenlight projects featuring candidates who were beaten up by a rubber boy, but I do think that there is a narrative argument to be made. That argument being that as characters, we've already explored all of them. So it's much more interesting to clone the ones who are still quite mysterious. Because even though it's not actually them, it still kind of is them, and you can explore their characters through the leftover quirks in the clones. A good example of this is Zoro's first encounter with S-Hawk. This actually gives us some insight into Mihawk himself, because despite being a cyborg clone, Zoro accuses S-Hawk of having more humanity than Mihawk. And with well-established characters like Jinbei and Hancock, we get to see a new side of them by flipping them into antagonists. You wouldn't really get that with Doflamingo, Crocodile, or Moria because they're already well-explored antagonists. With that said, there could certainly be more, particularly since the Seraphim namesake comes from a series of 7 angels, which is a bit of a magical number with the 7 warlords. Well, sort of. I mean, it was. Originally there were 7, but there have been a total of 11, although post-time skip there have usually been about 5, given how quickly Law and Doflamingo fell out. So it gets confusing, just like the number of final seasons of Attack on Titan. So no wonder the world government canned the program. And actually, even if these are the only 4 Seraphim, that's still a pretty good trade, because the world government only had 5 warlords left, so I still think they made a profit there. Speaking of profit, that is the most likely reason why there aren't more Seraphim, because of funding. Before all of the traitor, kill murdery stuff, that's how you kill murder apparently. But before all of that, the running theme of Egghead Island was needing money, which begs the question, how much does a Seraphim cost? Currently, our only indicator of expense is Lilith's line, "Do you have any idea how much a single Seraphim costs? I ought to twist your heads off." To be fair, Lilith, as literal evil, would probably twist someone's head off for a cabbage. A convenient economic metric we do have, as cabbages in the One Piece world carry an approximate value of 150 berries. So with that, we can deduce that a Seraphim costs at least 150 berries. But let's go a bit deeper. What's the most expensive object in the One Piece world? world. Currently, that is identified as the Opi Opi no Mi, which was put on the market for 5 billion berries, which is about 38 million US dollars. And I think a Seraph is worth at least that, if not more. However, the single most expensive transaction we know of was Doflamingo offering to sell King Riku the rights to Dressrosa for 10 billion berries, a number which apparently Dressrosa had because Riku ordered to gather all the money. It would have crippled the economy, but they did have the cash. So I imagine that a Seraphim costs at least the monetary supply of a small nation, thus bringing the cost for an individual unit close to 100 million US dollars. And even that might be a gross underestimation. So understandably, there may not have been enough money to invest into all 7 Seraphim at once. Or perhaps they did actually start with S Flamingo, S Bat, and S Crocodile, but they all failed due to reasons. And the first successful unit was one of the 4 that we currently know. However, due to my own personal desires, right now I choose to believe that these 3 have been created and are either faulty or currently untested. All I know is that my life will never be complete without seeing a Doflamingo versus Doflamingo matchup.